Well, Andy, what a moment to be talking about the Champions League when we're in the middle of this week's Champions League. How come? Usually we speak at the end of a week of Champions League matches.
Well, this is a full gala opening, isn't it? So we've got games across 3 nights instead of 2. That won't be happening going forward, but normally we have the benefit of hindsight. Whereas you, the listener, know more than us because you're probably sitting there listening to this while you're watching, or maybe while you're watching the early or late games in Thursdays, and there's plenty to come. But look, there's been plenty already as well. And as you were saying, Juventus off to a fantastic start, really.
Yeah, it's arrivederci, isn't it, back to the Champions League for Juventus. Were they missed for you, David? Is their place truly in the Champions League?
I mean, I don't think they were missed because Allegri was in charge. So I don't think anyone was really...
Break it to us gently.
I don't think anyone's chops were smacking at the prospect of Allegri being in the Champions League with Juve. But in their current guise, absolutely. I think they're one of the most... we said this before. I think they're going to be one of the most intriguing, interesting teams to watch around Europe anywhere this season because of the sheer raft of changes that they have made on every single level, coach, players, playing style. So they're going to be a fascinating watch. I put them in my top 5 teams to watch in Europe this season in terms of stories.
It certainly were fascinating in this opening match for them against PSV Eindhoven, but arguably Eindhoven really weren't at the races till the very end.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, it was 3-1 to Juventus in the end, but I think that flattered PSV a bit. I was getting strong vibes of PSV getting absolutely tanked at Arsenal on the opening match day last season, in that they're a good team, but this is the sort of thing that gets you reputation as slow starters. Of course, Arsenal away and Juventus away are difficult games, but I think PSV had a reason to think that they could go there and go toe-to-toe with Juventus. But I guess the question is, what are we really expecting of Juventus and what really are they at this moment? As David says, they've got a freshness that I can't really remember a Juventus side having really at all in the past. And I think a part of that is Motta, of course, and he coached like a far more experienced coach in this sort of area. And we've got to bear in mind, go back a little while, and before Paris Saint-Germain appointed Luis Enrique, they strongly considered Thiago Motta, who of course was such a key piece in midfield for them, before to be their coach. He went off, managed Bologna instead, and did a really good job there. But I think it's about the players as well. If you've looked at the Juventus team sheet this season, it's a really young team, and you've got a feeling not just of that energy, but of that ingenuity in this. And David, I was delighted to see Kenan Yildiz score that brilliant opener because, funnily enough, I think he's played way better than the numbers would suggest so far this season. He is, if not their key player, like one of their absolute key players. And literally seconds before he got the ball, and which he ended up turning into the goal, I thought he could do with a goal, but he's the guy who enables everyone else at the moment rather than the guy who gets the goals for himself. But I just wonder if, maybe that'll be the story of his career, at least in the medium term, that he's someone who, rather than being a great goal scorer, scores goals as a sort of byproduct of his all-round excellence.
Yeah, and look, I think whenever a new manager comes into a club, you assess the squad and you look at it and go, right, which players could really, really benefit from this? Which players could really progress under this new coach? And you compare and contrast with what Motta did in his previous role and how he worked with players there. And Yildiz was one of those players, I think, that jumped off the Juve squad list that you thought, okay, this kid could really become a monster under Motta. And the signs are all there of that. Incredible physical customer, wonderful technique.
For a teenager as well. He
Exactly.
looks solid.
He's a big lad. He is. But as we saw with the finish, and we saw with his build-up play, his approach play, incredibly technically gifted player as well. And you mesh those two things together, that's your perfect Motta player. That's exactly what he wants. And if you even look at Juve in that game throughout, they seem to smother and suffocate PSV very early. As soon as PSV reached the halfway line, there was Juventus bodies around, including their wingers, Gonzalez and Yildiz, who were coming back, coming inside to add numbers in midfield and win that ball back high up, and then Juve could break very quickly with those faster players that they have now got. They've got a different profile of player now, and they obviously had to do that. New manager, you have to support them with the players that suit his style, and considering they've had one window, they've done it very well so far.
Yeah, I think you've got to see that Kenan Yildiz goal to understand why we're talking so much about him, and it really is looking promising for Turkey going forward. They've got two of the brightest youngsters in world football at the moment, if you add Arda Güler to it, but we'll come back to that on another OTC. What I'm interested in now is finding out whether Thiago Motta has stamped his authority on this Juventus now. Is it a Motta side that we're seeing, a youthful Motta side, and what does it bode for Juventus, not just in the Champions League, domestically and so on?
We're starting to see that, I think, and I think it's an interesting point to make, Don, because Juventus, when they were successful under Conte and Allegri the first time, I don't think anyone enjoyed watching them still. It was just a sense of creeping inevitability of, fino alla fine. They'll get it done in the end.
They seem to make the simple things seem extremely hard to do. A very simple 1-0 win or 2-0 win just seemed to be a real grueling experience to watch.
It's like Italian Atletico, isn't it? It's all about the struggle.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, and Juventus always have been about athleticism. You think of those great sides under Allegri who won several championships. There's so many of those games they were able to physically overpower teams in the last 20 minutes or whatever of those games. Now, of course, I think when you've got a younger team, you do have a physical advantage, or you should have a physical advantage anyway in terms of athleticism. But I think the key figure here, actually, outside Thiago Motta, outside any of the players, is Cristiano Giuntoli, who was the sporting director of Napoli, the sporting director of Napoli who built the title-winning team and, the best Italian team to watch that I can think of in absolutely ages, by the way. And he's been brought into Juventus for a reason. Why? Well, not just because he's been successful in the past, but he's been successful doing a particular job. Juventus's aim in this season, and in fact, in all the seasons since they decided they were out on Cristiano Ronaldo, has been to get the wage bill down. They have had a monstrous wage bill and a lot of players who they didn't want. And that has taken time to shave all those players off. It's taken a lot of time. And for them to get to this point, it's taken a while. So there's a lot of work that's gone into it already. In terms of it being instant gratification under Motta, okay, it's only just Motta's team. But Giuntoli and the club have spent a while trying to get the squad under control, make things a little bit more affordable. If you look at the way they pieced together the deal to sign Douglas Luiz, and Douglas Luiz, after being actually told off quite a lot in the press for his performance and by fans for his performance starting last week in his first start at Empoli, which I think is a little unfair. He didn't start this game. But normally, Juventus wouldn't, or modern day Juventus wouldn't be able to go and buy Douglas Luiz, a starter and a very good starter for a top Premier League team and Brazil. And so they had to make weight it by throwing in Samuel Illing Jr. I wonder if that's a deal that Juventus will actually regret in the medium term. And Barrenechea as well. But both players who've gone out on loan to Spain, and Illing Jr. will be playing in the Champions League with Bologna, respectively. So they've had to be a little bit more cunning, because it was the same thing at Napoli. Giuntoli wasn't given a bottomless pot by De Laurentiis at all. And, fans were complaining at the start of the season that they won the league that the club were doing it on the cheap. So I think we're going back to a point, and maybe this is something that's spreading over the market in Europe generally, because there's not a bottomless pit for anyone, that clubs generally, and even a club the size of Juventus traditionally, are having to say, okay, what's a way in which we can create a successful generation by using our money wisely, by leaning on the younger players that we have already, and they're definitely doing that as well.
They've got
Of
some
course, Yildiz
fantastic
has
young
come through.
players as well, you know.
And now they're in the right spot to actually get a chance, aren't they?
Yeah, finally. And again, it was one of the biggest problems with Allegri. They clearly had a core of 4 or 5 players that had come out of that academy who were ready for the first team and ready to get minutes. And I think we're going to see a lot more of them due to just, like I said, the style changing at the club. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they develop. Not going to get too carried away. There's obviously going to be a few setbacks and pitfalls in terms of how much they take on. Like I said, there's going to be a lot to take on. I think Thiago Motta has a lot of particular principles, and all the players will have to take that on over the course of the season. So, but they're going to be a really interesting watch.
And talking about the finances, remind me, why are we welcoming Juve back into the Champions League? Why were they out of it?
They took what would be considered a bit of a plea deal for various financial misdeeds in that they accepted, even though they claimed no liability, they accepted a ban from Europe for last season, mainly because they'd only qualified for the Conference League. So they thought, right, if we're going to, it's not really worth us pursuing this. We'll take that and go from there. Now, for that reason, they were able to, I guess, work out if Allegri was going to work again in the medium to long term. Because if you think Allegri had loads of time on the training pitch with his players last season because they had no European football, they started the season really well. And then when they lose the game in February against Inter at the San Siro, it's only 1-0 and it's only an own goal that wins it by Daniele Dogani, I think it was. But at that point, they're almost neck and neck with Inter. And then Inter start to streak away and Juventus start to fall to bits. And that's the point at which it becomes apparent Allegri has no answers. We need to accelerate this rebuild and we need to think outside the box. So I just wonder, David, if we project forward, be it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, depending on not just what Juventus can do results-wise, but how they do it. Will they look back at that game against Inter and think, actually, that's done us a bit of a favour? Really?
I think sometimes, because results in the scheme of things can sometimes give you a wrong idea of where you actually are.
Yeah.
You need to look at the bigger picture of where you are. And I think anybody who had followed Juventus closely, watched their games regularly, knew that things needed to change. I think we've been talking about it on this podcast for 2 years, I think. And they finally got around to doing it. And look, when somebody such as Motta is available, and what he professes and what he wants to do, I think it's the ideal move. And I think Juve made one of the best appointments of the summer from any club.